Hello and welcome to Off the Fence, a podcast where we deconstruct difficult decision making to try to figure out what keeps us stuck and, more importantly, how do we get unstuck? I'm your host, Karen Covey, a former divorce lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator turned coach, author, and entrepreneur. With me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Greg Stewart. Dr. Greg Stewart lives in Rockwell, Texas, and is currently a full-time telehealth counselor, executive coach, and consultant. He has a BA in organizational leadership, a Master of Divinity, a Master's in counseling, and a PhD in counselor education and supervision. He's the author of I Cubed, Unlock the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions, and I Cubed for Couples, Facing Our Negative Emotions to Build Intimacy in Marriage. He is currently working on his third book, The Leadership Quotient, which will be available in the fall of 2025. Dr. Stewart, welcome to the show.
And thank you so much for having me. Obviously the honor is mine.
Oh, I am thrilled to have you and excited to dig into our subject of negative emotions and all the things. But before we do that, I'm just curious, could you share a little bit of your backstory with the audience? What got you to doing the work that you do today?
Right. So first I want to say that obviously being on the podcast, we have similar mindsets because mindset is everything on both of our walls. So brilliant, right? It goes way back, but it'll make it a quick story of when I was a child, because it plays into it that I went to like junior church like a lot of us as kids and then became a Christian back then. And then my parents could go into church, which meant I could go into church. And then I did the party hardy teen years and then some of the consequences from those years. And then after I recommitted my life to Christ, I felt called into the ministry. At that time, I had like 3 years under my belt for my bachelor's degree, and then but stopped that, and then went on a missions trip to South America and went to a Bible Institute, and then came back and then became a pastor at the very church I became a Christian at. But I was wanting to get into seminary, but I didn't have a bachelor's degree, right? I have like back then in the 90s, there was all these schools that started the adult continuing programs where one night a week for a year, you get a degree. And the degree they offered was organizational leadership, which was great. Love the material, but my focus was to get to seminary. So finished that. And then my first semester of seminary, I took philosophy of counseling. And then my eyes were open to how powerful the material could be, obviously within ministry, but also I started to feel these exposure things happening in my own, like, man, I got issues, right? So I mapped out a dual master's degree. Then after got my master of divinity, I was ordained in 2000. But right then, a perfect storm happened where, in a good way, where I started teaching as an adjunct professor in all of the organizational leadership courses that I took and for my alma mater, and fell in love with organizational leadership, and at the same time came across the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, right, as a lot of us did back then. And then at the same time I was underneath a leader that the guy was great in so many ways, but man, he had a lot of just emotional struggles, and I could not reconcile that. How could a pastor who loves the Bible and praying but just have so many emotional struggles? So as that carried on, he left the church. Then I became the senior pastor. I was at that church for 15 years. And that's when I got worked on my PhD in counseling. Started that in 2005, graduated in 2008, but then did my dissertation on the relationship of emotional intelligence with job satisfaction and organizational commitment. After that, there was a guy in our church that he was a VP of HR for the largest division of a medical device company in Michigan. Very, very powerful Fortune 500 company. And that's where I cut my executive coaching and organizational strategist, consultant teeth on. And then after I left the ministry, had a great experience there. We moved to Texas in 2012. Then I flew around the country for 3 years. I worked for an assessments company where we benchmarked top performers and did Leadership 360. So I'd meet with senior leadership teams across all industries, did executive coaching, had a great experience. And then we got bought out by another company, which, 80% of us got laid off. So if you've never been laid off, you got to try it. It's an incredible experience. So after all that, all that is to say, so have the letters behind my name, lots of success. But what is part of it that led into all this is in 2011, I ended up having an emotional affair. And that just simply means there's an emotional connection, relational, but we didn't do anything physically. And I was devastated because how could I, as a pastor and marriage counselor, kind of slip into this? And so that began honestly a 10-year healing process, Karen, of finding out, which led to obviously the whole process of the book. So after that, I went to work at a behavioral health hospital for a residential treatment center for kids, learned trauma there. But in the last year or so, even though I wanted to write my book IQ for 20 years, the content really flowed from not only my counseling expertise, but it flowed from having to do a deeper dive into Greg. So I always tell clients like this material, both books, kind of flow from, what I experienced and the application of it. So my marriage never recovered, but, even though I'm divorced, that my couples book, I say I am, 10 times the marriage counselor now than I would have been because of this growth experience.
So you went through all these things, you had all this education, and even though you were at the time a marriage counselor yourself, your own marriage fell apart.
Yep.
What did you learn in that process, and what is the basis for your work in I Cubed, which is the book or the books that you've written so far?
Right. So what that kind of uncovered was a couple of things. One is that, my whole premise of the book, obviously just in our own growth and development, and I use this for the counselor, the couples book, it's that, I call it the first pillar that I say, if, the miracle question, if you guys woke up tomorrow and your marriage is perfect, what would be different about you? So I knew that I wouldn't go down this road of just blaming my spouse. I had to figure out what was being exposed in Greg, because even though, I can complain about some of her struggles, me having the emotional affair is not her issue, it's mine. And it exposed, because way back then I felt like, I feel like I'm pursuing everybody harder than pursuing me. And it really led to this exposure of some insecurities deep within me. Right. So doing that work of what was happening, then I realized, just both of us as individuals and as spouses, that when I will get into it, but the inflation of emotion we have to pay attention to. And instead of like negative emotion, we're burning energy on other people. We've got to walk into our negative emotions and figure out what's being exposed.
Okay, let me stop you there. What do you mean when you say what's being exposed? I'm a little
Right.
confused.
Okay. So I'll start with like simplicity, that everything we do is trying to achieve an emotional goal. Everything. So we have micro emotional goals, which means if I'm thirsty, I want to feel that my thirst is quenched. I want to feel full, I mean, it's all about the emotions, right? Emotional goals. So there's micro emotion goals and then macro. The macro emotion goals have to do with our quality of life, which is standard of living, living our values, and then fulfilling destiny, purpose, and calling. So as we're pursuing those goals, it's wonderful. The goals are good. But the first thing we have to look at is the path we take to achieve those goals. Simple example is if I'm super stressed and I choose the path of drinking alcohol to decrease my stress, not a healthy path. So the paths are what need assessed. Like I use rational, healthy, wise, and right. So, secondly, though, is when our paths are blocked, our emotional goals, let's say for couples, the main emotional goal for a guy is significance. The main emotional goal for a gal, again, generally speaking, is security. So, what I do when my emotional goal is blocked, my significance goal is blocked, I have emotions, right? So, negative emotions aren't bad, because obviously, if I have negative emotions like, oh, I got to write this paper or I've got to do the laundry, not bad. They're just negative energy we burn to fix problems. The problem is we have an inflation. Okay. So there's three reasons that emotions are inflated. So on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say, Karen, that you call me a name, right? Say, well, Dr. Stewart, man, dude, bless your heart, but you have some serious ADHD. Okay, let's say you say that. I'm like, how could you say that, right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a deal is it that Karen says something negative about me? Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a one. Right, fine, but I'm at a 6, 7, or an 8. That's the inflation. So the actual topic is really only a one level of importance, but I have a 6, 7, or 8 level of energy. So this is what I say. We have to picture that behind us is the house of our heart. Okay. I'm standing on the front lawn. And before me are all the people like currently in my life or things that are, causing negative emotions, right? But what's the human tendency? I will sit on the front lawn and burn all this emotional energy processing all them, processing you, right? So, number one is we're saying that the solution to my negative emotions is them changing, which is horrible because that's where the power is. So I say we want to take all power and control away from the environment. We want to empower ourselves, not take away the influence, right? It should influence us, but take away power and control. So, secondly, is on the inflation again is not Karen's issue or George's issue. So I say we got to turn around and walk into the house of our heart. And in each of the rooms are just the general emotions I deal with, like insecurity, anxiety, fear, worry, anger, depression. But there's three main causes for the inflation. The first most common one is simply lies that we believe, right? So if I'm looking for a job, I say, "Oh, I'll never get a job." Well, emotions don't produce themselves, they come from sentences in our mind. And those sentences, if we say, Karen meant to do it, or she doesn't like me, or she's manipulating me, oh my goodness. And if they're not, I mean, it's not true, but it'll produce a lot of a negative emotional energy. So the number one reason is we believe lies about ourselves, the situation, about the person. Secondly, like in the first floor is insecurity. So insecurity is really where it begins on the exposure. So I like telling the story when I was a kid in Michigan, 14 years old, we worked at a hamburger joint. And in the book, I talk about that we're all friends there, but I used to be a super sarcastic teenager, but you can tell I've grown, right? Right? Right?
Of course.
Of course, right. Thank you for the affirmation, right?
Yeah.
So this one gal, I was teasing her so bad I made her cry. And as she's walking away, don't judge me, right? As she's walking away, I yell out, "You wouldn't get so ticked off if it wasn't true," right? And I stopped right there, though, and it became a defining moment for me because I said, "Oh my gosh, Greg, every time somebody point something out negative about you or trash talks you, it's got to be truth or else it doesn't work." Then I step back and say, man, every time somebody cuts another person down, there's got to be some truth to it. They might exaggerate it, but there's some truth to it. Or otherwise, like if I say, Karen, I'm really concerned about your heroin addiction kind of thing. You're like, what? If it's not true, it doesn't have any impact, right? So insecurity has to do with something I don't like about myself, but I don't want it exposed. So that's the first room. So with I talk about with the RTC girls, I used to work with teenage girls, loved them to death. They would say, "Dr. Greg, she's pushing my buttons." I'm like, "Well, honey, uninstall your buttons." The issue isn't that she's pushing them. The issue is you've got buttons to push. Another gal would say, "Dr. Greg, she called me this name," and I won't say the name. And I said, "Sweetie, the issue isn't that she called you that name. The issue is that you agree with her and you didn't want her pointing it out." Right. So trying to honestly, even though it sounds like, man, that's mean, it's actually had a great relationship with them, but I was trying to empower them, take the power away from the environment. You
Hmm.
have the power, right? So that's the insecurity piece. But there's a doorway right there that leads into the basement. And in the basement is the machine of identity, value, and worth. So whenever we take things personally, what does that mean? It means that the insult, I'm letting that insult or criticism or negative event impact my value and worth. And it should not because I inflate it. That's the second reason. Then, of course, over in the corner, the cellar, dark, dingy cellar, is the cellar of trauma. Big T trauma and then little t. Not all of us have been through big T, but almost all of us have been through little t trauma. So, my point is that these three reasons for the inflation, it's the inflation that we've got to say that all negative emotions exposing something to me, and I've got to figure that out because I can't just, Karen, you say whatever you're going to say. I can't dump on you a 6, 7, or 8 level of emotional intensity because it's going to damage. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to make it worse. So the inflation is my issue. I mean, the one is your issue. Like, hey, Karen, don't say that. But the inflation is what is being exposed to me, and it's something deeper that we've got to press into and walk into.
Okay, so question. I mean, you that was a lot. But is this something that everybody experiences, or is it situational, or how does somebody develop these
Yeah.
inflated emotions?
I think I don't know. I'm just I don't know of a human being that doesn't, right? Because it's part of like so like with identity and worth, I say, where do we get the formula for our value and worth to begin with? Well, it begins with our parents, right? So if a child feels pursued by his or her parents, and that pursuit is, of course, unconditional love, helping us recover from failure and equipping us. And again, I just say that's like every human being ever existed gets their value with their parents. So there's this automatic training that we get our value and the formula for our value and worth, the assessment of our value and worth from parents, then what gets added to it are peers. If I feel pursued by peers, then of course significant others, teachers, bosses, coaches. So it's just this, it all the way through the first 20, whatever some odd years of our life, it's already ingrained that we get our value and worth from others' opinions, right? So I say my point is like to break it up and say everybody needs to make the decision to remove every other human being from that formula, right? So you say, I don't need Karen to pursue, validate, approve of me. I mean, I want her to, but I don't need her to. So I go through a process of stabilizing and solidifying everybody's identity, value, and worth. Like I am the one that decides my identity, value, and worth. Like I have control of it, not the environment. Because obviously, if my value and worth is contingent upon other people pursuing me, it's a mess. Now, so what I'm saying is, I think everybody has inflated emotions because of just that one process alone. Again, man, not everybody goes through the big T or little T trauma, but everybody believes lies, right? So I think it's an every human being thing.
So when somebody has this, I mean, because the context in which I work with most people is marriage and divorce, right? So
Sure.
if a divorce is imminent or if the marriage is not great, situationally, like divorce never brings out the good in anybody. It brings out the worst in people, not the best in people. So, how can people, is this something that like it can change your emotional inflation can change depending on what situation you're going through?
Yeah, of course. And it's obviously directly related to the topic and how much that topic is related to our value and worth, which relates to our macro emotional goals, like our quality of life. And obviously, the more our quality of life, standard of living, living our values, and fulfilling destiny, calling, and purpose, like going through divorce and how much it's going to impact the kids, the closer it's related to the macro emotional goals, the more inflated it's going to be, whatever the topic is, right? So again, I think it's just everybody. So I say that the first step in any process is self-awareness. Just be aware of as soon as you have negative emotions, and that's easy because it's on the surface, and then recognizing that emotions don't produce themselves, they come from thoughts. Once you recognize the self-aware, I have negative emotions, then simply on a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a deal is it? And then if it's like I am bringing way too much emotional energy to the situation, then I got to figure out what else is going on, right? To decrease that negative energy. So when I say like on value and worth, and of course marriage, like I say to my wife, like I don't need my wife to pursue me. I want her to, but I don't need her to. That doesn't mean, because I do a lot of marriage counseling, it doesn't mean that the definition of relationship, which I define as safety and pursuit, does not change the definition, does not change the standard. I have very high standards for marital relationship, and does not change like played out expectations. What it changes is the degree of negative impact on me if it doesn't occur.
If
And that's the key. If pursuit doesn't occur. So
Okay.
if it's like a lot of us, we in marriages especially, look, we agree to this and I need you. Why don't you love me? Or why'd you have an affair? Why'd you, because now we take it it's so easy, especially in marriage, to take it personally. I mean, logically, right? But it's through the healing process that we have to say, I don't need, I want, because all the marriages and the divorce situations are different. But somehow, way, shape, or form, via a threat to a woman's security or a threat to a guy's significance, it's obviously so easy to take it personally.
Okay, so you know, let's break this down a little bit. So what you've said is that the biggest value for men is significance, that they need to feel significant to their wife and to the world. And for women, their biggest value is security. Am I understanding this right?
Security, safety are a synonym of it. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say in the context of a situation where there's an affair and you're saying, how, the person, whoever it was, whether it was the man or the woman, whoever had the affair, that their spouse needs to not take it personally.
Um,
If I'm playing devil's advocate, how do
yep,
you not do that?
for sure. And so taking it personally means impacting value and worth. Now, I mean, so you don't do that in one sense where practically speaking, and I have seen the entire range of people's responses to, let's say, a wife whose husband's looking at pornography. I've seen it from the wife was like, look, don't do it, but guys are going to do it, to wives that the guy just looks at a swimsuit model or likes a gal on Instagram and she melts down, right? So there is a
Mhm.
degree, like, and then obviously continuation. So taking it personally, I'm going to take it personally, but I'm saying it should not impact our value and worth. And again, it's a process. So even with affairs, I've seen, as I'm sure you have, that it's about the degree of response to how much it impacts me. Because even though, like, we enter into a covenant, a contract in marriage, that I've seen adults just understand that, we have our own issues going on, and then this junk happens, and it's more objective than it is subjective. So not taking it personally means that this stuff does happen, and it's not related to me per se. I mean, I can always be a better husband, but my wife choosing to have an affair is not my issue. It's hers. It's her poor response. Because I've had husbands all the time, as soon as the discovery happens, and then why did you do it? And the husband's naturally going to say, well, he's going to say, I didn't feel like my needs were met. What's her response going to be? Don't blame this on me, right? Or she'll say, and she should say, which is fair, you know what? We are both struggling, but I didn't go out and she's exactly right. They're both struggling, but he made the choice or she made the choice to seek it elsewhere. So knowing that, like, this is not a me issue. We need to work on our marriage. This is not a me issue. This is a you issue. You made a terrible choice. Now, I understand objectively you didn't feel like your needs were met. We're in a good spot, but again, it's not that my worth decreases. It's not a value and worth thing. So that's what I mean by taking it personally. I mean, it's a value and worth. It's just objectively, this stuff happens when marriages aren't, they're not meeting needs. Or it just happens because people are selfish, right? And they can't, they can't be content within, a monogamous relationship. So it is, I've seen it just naturally happen among various people. I've seen from the meltdown to the objective, like, I have to make a decision whether or not I want to continue, because it's an agreement, safety and pursuit, safety and pursuit. Now, am I going to continue on in this relationship? I have to think about it, because, it's all the way through life. It's an agreement. Me and my friends, like, if safety is threatened, like, I open up to my buddy Max and he starts mocking me. Okay, well, I guess that shuts that down. We all make decisions, and we just realize objectively that's how relationships work.
Okay, so when you're talking about safety, I just want to clarify, you mean something more than simply physical safety. Like you're not talking about domestic violence here.
Of course, and that's what's funny. And I honestly just throw my gender of the bus. Guys, when your wife says she doesn't feel safe with you, she's not talking about physical. She's talking about emotional and relational safety, right? There's various kinds. So it's not even like verbal or emotional abuse. It's just I'm not feeling safe in this conversation because I can't open up, right? So yeah, it's not physical abuse, and safety is just emotional, relational safety so we can continue the conversation. Yeah, for sure.
So if somebody is in that situation, whether male or female, whatever is their need that is not being met in a marriage, and they decide they're going to get a divorce, and then the relationship breaks down even more, because in my experience,
Yep.
when the minute the word divorce is introduced into the relationship, the trust goes away. I mean, it really suffers right out of the gate. And so nobody trusts anybody and emotions are running high. What can someone do to start to rein in their own emotions and their own reaction to whatever it is that their spouse is doing? Because people's normal reaction is to say, he did this or she
Right.
did that, or, and then you kind of go spiraling off into a bad place.
Right. So first would be on the first inflation are lies. We are ripe to believe lies about the other person, about the situation, again, about ourselves, whatever. So we've got to hold ourselves accountable we want to make sure that our evaluation of the situation, what's actually happening, it's based in truth. Secondly, is it's so easy to interpret actions like unfulfilled expectations. Like I expect you to pick up the kids, then we immediately turn it into unfulfilled expectations, turn into a character issue, an integrity issue, the manipulation, which is we can't do motives, right? Just what is objective truth? So that is first, we have to stick to what truth is and not fall into lies because it's going to make us miserable. Yep.
Okay, let me interrupt you again. I'm sorry, but so many people, they're when they're in a situation, the relationship is crumbling, they say, I don't know what's true. You are not telling me the truth. I don't have access to truthful information. So how do I know?
Right. So it's going to be based upon the information. So sure, they have to like it's got to get down to like physical like and setting of boundaries like finances, schedule. It's right. So whether or not I'm telling the truth because people what the truth, I don't know what the truth is. Well, in that context, it's I don't know what the truth meaning relationally, like what you meant or what you're saying you're gonna do. Like, no, we'll do this amicably. Like, I don't know if that's true, or I don't know
Exactly.
if he has another relationship on the side. All that is, but you need to know that because what are we doing? We're in self survival mode. So I don't know what the truth is, and I'm gonna assume because obviously she's more wrong than me. So that's what we don't know the truth, and we're searching. This is the mistake we're searching for evidence against the person. But when it comes to true, like playing it out, when it comes to schedules, finances, you can set that up. All the other stuff is interpretive. All the other stuff is emotional that we don't know the truth, right? And that's just, they don't know the truth either because trust is broken down, right? And
Right.
honestly, just the fact of the matter is that um, you have to walk through that, and each person has you still have to make a decision, obviously, on what are we going to do from this point on, right? But just to protect all the negative energy, the drama, the gossip, it's truth. Like the classic one is, as we know, it's we don't disparage our spouse to the children, right? So we have to do things because research came out where the two factors most related to how well the children do is can the parents bury the hatchet? And secondly, is dad still involved in their lives? So at some point, we've got to move from subjective, from woe is me, for I'm wounded, to objectively speaking, we've got to make sure that our ducks in a row, we have boundaries set up, agreeable. It's okay, like let's separate, let's figure it out logistically. I will grieve later, I'll process later. Right now, it's about doing this where we don't cause further damage. That's what it's about. It's we can make a choice right now that even though there's a lot of damage caused already that I'm hurting from, we do have a choice right now not to cause further damage.
Right. But what if, again, playing devil's advocate, you, or at least in your perspective, you're not the one who's causing the damage. You're trying to get your own emotions under control. You're trying to do all the right things, but your spouse is acting like a lunatic. Your spouse is doing stupid stuff, which people do in divorce all the time, right?
Yep.
So you say, how am I supposed to maintain my control over my emotions when my spouse isn't maintaining control over his or her emotions, and they're the ones that are making a mess?
Right. So what does control over emotions mean? It means that again, the goal is not to have little or no negative emotions. The goal is to have the right amount. So the right amount might be an 8, meaning based upon what is the worst thing that's happening because your spouse is dot 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 whatever it is they're doing through the divorce process, and it could be horrible. They drain all the money out of the bank account. Well, yeah, if you don't have any money for groceries, that's up there to 8, 9, or 10. So there's nothing. It's controlling emotions means that you have to respond with the right amount because emotional energy gets burned via inaction. What is the most healthy, effective response here? how much emotional energy do I know? Because control column versus no control. We've both seen it where, yes, one spouse just goes to town,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean controlling your emotions doesn't mean that you have low emotions. Controlling your emotions means they don't get inflated. We can't
I see.
afford the inflation, but yes, some situations based upon the severity of the situation, it is at a 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 for sure. Well, like I use an example. If my grandson, just became a grandfather. My grandson runs out into the street. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a deal is that? It's always based upon what bad is happening. What are the consequences? It's a 10. So I'm going to burn a 10 level of energy to protect my grandson. That happens in these divorce situations. So yeah, the goal is not to have low. The goal is to have the right amount because we've also seen what? Some spouses just go into them being the sacrifice and they just, sanction and they just kind of roll over,
Right.
right? And that's having too low,
Yeah.
right? The passivity having too low of negative emotions, right? The goal, and that's just as unhealthy, right? So it's what is the most healthy, effective response, and then whether it be too low, because it's based on personality as well, whether it be too low or too high. So the controlling of emotions is not only pulling emotions back. Controlling emotions also means generating and burning them off, like the person who is just being too passive. They have the emotional energy in there. Well, controlling your emotions mean you burn it by saying, no, I'm going to set a boundary here. So it's about having the right amount of emotional energy and ensuring that you have the right response. And the biggest thing is, again, avoiding lies, not, the value and worth thing, as well as the trauma of it that's got to be set aside. We have to put our game face on. There'll be a time to grieve. But right now it's game face. Right now I've got to stabilize, you know, create safety, create security. It's not time for me to process like what this means to me in the universe. It's game face time.
Okay. So I'd like we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to switch gears to your book, I Cubed, and especially the one relating to couples, because you've got two.
Mhm.
One I assume is for individuals, the other one's for
Yeah,
couples.
this one's for individuals. This one's for couples. It's
You got
purple,
them. There
right?
you go.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the books. What is the main premise of the books? What can people get from that?
Right. So everything we've talked about to this point really is like the premise of the I Cube, the first book, where there is a deeper dive into identity and worth and so on. The second book for couples, I don't include the identity, value, and worth. I don't include like trauma. I do include how to recover from affairs in the couples book, but in the couples book, as I kind of as people are reading through it, I talk about emotional goals and all that and frame it in marriage. But I literally say several times, like, if your emotional is getting inflated right now, you need to put this book down and go back to my first book and do a deeper dive into that. Because again, and then I intentionally did that, not just to, sell another book, but I did it because you have to mentally realize that I need to stop. And this is not a marriage topic or issue. This is a Greg issue, right? So I can't go through my wife. I can't go through the pathway of marriage to solve my insecurities. So you need to put this book down and do a deeper dive. The couples book, once I do the emotion stuff, then it's just all about equipping. Like every couple comes to me like wanting communication skills. Tons of skills in there, specific skills on how to problem solve. Because when I talk about safety and pursuit, I ask each couple, like, do you want your husband to feel safe emotionally, relationally in your heart? Of course I do. Do you want your wife to? Of course I do. And I say, guys, knowing that from this point forward, remember that. So when you don't feel safe, that's the anomaly. That's not who you really are. That's not your motives. When you don't feel safe, it's a skill issue, like problem solving. And then I asked, like, also remember when you guys are at your best, right? When you are the most in love, obviously the wedding day and the day after the honeymoon, that's who you really are. Because all of us wanted our entire marriage. We know it was gonna be perfect. We wanted our entire marriage to be that close. So again, what you're experiencing, it may be the most predominant, predominantly hell, if you will, but it's not who you are nor who you want to be. So it's like sets that foundation of safety and then who we are at our best. That's who we really are. So I want to
Mhm.
equip couples, equip them to be successful in, the communication skills as well as even expectations for relationship. Like, what does it look like to have enough time together? Like, quantify it. I call it scheduling the minimum because we talk about, like, just love your spouse. They need to feel loved. Okay, great, George. I mean, it just drives me crazy, but there are still tangible expectations, physical, behavioral expectations. If I'm going to feel loved, this is what I need my wife to do. Well, we got to get to
Mhm.
instead of just saying to my wife, "Hey, I just need to love and respect your husband." Okay, cool. What does that look like? Like, I have husbands. I mean, I always bless their hearts, right? Hey, are you pursuing your wife? Yeah, sure I am. I said, okay, name some actions you've done recently to pursue your wife. Oh, I cleaned up the kitchen after dinner. And I'm like, dude, no, no. Right. So I say we play for it. We're roommates, business partners, lovers, and then best friends. I said, dude, that's a roommate issue. Yeah. Ask your wife if she felt pursued, like romantically pursued, right? So it's just what are the expectations? Again, in the formulas in our brain,
Yeah.
what are the expectations behaviorally? What does it look like? Because we attribute like I said hi to you. Right? It's like it's not that bad, but it's sometimes it's that bad, right? Just the cluelessness. So I mean, that's what it's all about equipping, and factual. Like if we do this, we'll be successful. So that way, when I get upset, it's like I have to be able to point to someone, and I can't point to motives, right? Well, you don't want to pursue me. Great, right? No, what does it look like to pursue your husband? These things. I said, Google 100 ways to love your spouse, your husband, your wife. Underneath love languages, classic, right? So Google 10 to 15 ways to do quality time, 10 to 15 ways, behaviors to do acts of service, and then do them, right? So I try and quantify to equip so it's very tangible. So week after week after week, sometimes it is like, you know what? We've talked about this for weeks. You keep committing to doing these very behaviors, but you're not. So, at this point, it's just getting weird. At this point, it's just awkward. And your wife is wanting you to pursue, and you keep committing to, we give you the exact behaviors, but you don't. I'm like, it's just getting awkward now. It's like, right? So she has no choice but to feel that she's not worth it because you're proving it to her, right? So if we lay it out in actions, like if you buy her flowers, she will feel pursued. Did you buy her flowers this last week? No, I just had a lot going on. Did you go golfing? Yeah. Right. So that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But what do you do? Because I've seen this happen so many times where, well, let's just put it this in terms of the situation you just described. She wants flowers, and then but then he buys the flowers, and she said, "But I want you to buy flowers because you want to, not because I told you to."
Absolutely. Right. And that's why I would say, because early on when I did marriage counseling 30 years ago, absolutely. That's why I say, look, so some guys like I don't want um the wife or husband to equip because of that reason. Meaning saying, oh, do this, this, and this, because we should know, right? So I tell a guy, like I've had some guys say, look, I don't know what to do. And I don't have any patience or tolerance for that anymore. And of course, I'm going to be hard on guys because, I am one. So I said, dude, Lord forbid your wife gets hit by a bus tomorrow. 6 months, a year down the road, when you're healed and you start dating again, suddenly it all comes back. You won your wife to the altar to begin with, and you know how to win a woman to the altar. Don't give me that. Then I start going off on, right? So that's what it is. So that's what I'm saying. You know what to do. It's like, well, sure, Google 100 ways to love your wife, and then just for ideas, but you know what to do. You already know. Just do those things if you want. Because I say a good thing, as I put in the book, is my wife and I don't have anniversaries. We have our next wedding day. I want to win her
Interesting.
back to the altar again. And so
Like
there
that.
is this, and I say, when we talk about marriage is hard work, yeah, there's the communication stuff, but marriage is hard work because, like when I say about dates, on your date, no problem, don't discuss problems, but the measurement of success of your date is not where you eat or what activity you do. You have three goals for a date: have fun, flirt, show affection. Because I say what? So two people meet. Hi, I'm Greg. Hi, I'm Lisa. And then we start dating, right? Oh, look, there's a fight. But eventually, dun, dun, dun. But then after the wedding, everything we did to win our spouse to the altar drops off. And again, it's
Right.
not crazy because we want to, okay, let's build our lives now. We go into business partner mode and roommate mode. So, but we have to, where the hard work is, to do all the things. 'Cause think about how gracious we were, right? And in our church, they talked about, two pastors asked each other, like, what's the one thing, the main thing why marriages fail? Of course, I had my own answer. My answer to that is selfishness. It's just selfishness, right? So I believe my goal in like the best marriages is we outserve each other. I am a servant. I tell my wife, whatever you want, you get, because why? I don't wait for the emotions to come to serve her, to pursue her. That's ridiculous. We don't do that in any other area. I don't wait for emotions to come before I mow the lawn. I don't wait for emotions to come to work out. It's so when it comes to making my wife feel adored and loved, I'm not going to wait for an emotion. I'm going to serve because that's what I committed to. And then once we get into a zone, it's beautiful, but we are here to serve each other. It is selflessness. That's the core.
Yeah.
I think that's the core because if I talk about brag about, I ask myself the question, is my spouse compelled to brag about how incredible? Not do they brag about me? I'm saying, are they driven to like, oh my gosh, they're like shocked. I have never been loved like this before. Right? So I say that's the second pillar besides the first one, what would be different about me. The second pillar is if the answer to that question is no, your spouse would not say it, then it is illegal. I like using that word. It's illegal. You'll be arrested to have one complaint about your spouse until you get them to that point. Set a boundary in yourself. I will not have one complaint about my spouse or until I get her to the point of saying, I've never been loved like this before. Now we have to discuss things, but it's a mindset,
Mm-hmm.
right? I want my wife to say, I've never been loved like this before. Because what do? We pull away because like you're not meeting my needs, so I'm not gonna meet yours. And
Right.
then downward
And then
instead of saying,
down it
right.
goes.
So instead of
Yeah.
it being contingent, there's a bell curve with 100 Gregs on it. It's the bell curve of Greg as a husband. That bell curve has nothing to do with how good of a spouse my wife is. I'm going to be the 100, I'm trying to go for that 100 percentile Greg because that's the value I want to live. I want to be that great of a husband. And yes, if I feel my wife needs, then it's again, we have a conversation, but I don't need her. I don't need her to pursue her value. It's just I'm going to be the 95th, 96th percentile great husband because that's what I want to be. And of
Yeah.
course, if we both do that, imagine that zone. It's beautiful.
Yeah. That would that would be beautiful, and it's words to the wise for everyone out here. And Dr. Stewart, thank you so much for being here. There's been so much packed into this conversation. If
Mm.
people want to know more, if they want to dive into this, where's the best place for them to find you?
Simply go to drgregstewart.com and all one word, DRGREGSTEW, not you, EWART. So drgregstewart.com. And I have my books there. I have everything there.
That's awesome. And for those of you who are listening, everything is going to be linked in the show notes, so you can just go there and find everything you need to know about Dr. Stewart. And again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know the audience does as well. And for those of you in the audience, if you've enjoyed today's episode, if you want to hear more episodes from more amazing guests just like Dr. Stewart, do me a big favor. Give this episode a thumbs up, like, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.